Mia loved exploring abandoned places, and the old farmhouse on the edge of town was her latest discovery. The house was crumbling, its walls covered in ivy, and its roof sagged under years of decay. But it wasn't the house that intrigued her, it was the well in the backyard. The well was ancient, its stones slick with moss, and a rusted crank dangled a frayed rope into the darkness below. As Mia peered into the well, her voice echoed back faintly, distorted and strange. "Hello?" she called. "Hello," a voice replied, mimicking her tone but with a slight delay. Mia laughed, convinced it was just the acoustics. "Who's there?" "Who's there?" the echo responded, the voice slightly deeper now. She felt a chill creep up her spine but shrugged it off, tossing a small rock into the well. Instead of the expected splash, there was a long silence, then a faint thud. Curiosity got the better of her. She found a flashlight in her bag and lowered it into the well, but the beam couldn't reach the bottom. Suddenly, the crank began to spin on its own, the rope descending deeper into the darkness. Panicked, Mia tried to stop it, but the rope burned against her hands. The spinning stopped abruptly. From the shadows below, she heard something climbing, the sound of nails scraping against the stone walls. "Mia," a voice echoed softly, but it wasn't hers. It was something else, something hungry. She backed away, but the climbing sound grew louder, faster. A pale hand shot out of the well, its fingers unnaturally long and clawed. Then came another hand, pulling up a face, a twisted version of her own, its eyes hollow and mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. "Mia," it hissed again, mimicking her voice perfectly. She turned and ran, but the creature climbed out fully, its distorted limbs moving with terrifying speed. It followed her through the farmhouse, always staying just out of reach, mimicking every scream and gasp she made. Finally, she reached her car, slamming the door and locking it. Breathing heavily, she looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing was behind her. Relieved, she started the car and drove away, her heart pounding. As she glanced at the mirror again, her reflection grinned back at her, not her normal grin, but the twisted, hollow-eyed one from the well. Elliot was returning home late, the streets empty except for the distant hum of a train. His phone buzzed, last train, 12:15 a.m. Don't miss it. Strange, he thought, he hadn't told anyone he was taking the train. Shrugging it off, he arrived at the station just as the midnight train rolled in. The platform was eerily deserted, and the train looked ancient, its metal frame rusted and windows clouded with grime. Still, it was his only way home. Inside, the train was silent except for the faint screech of the wheels. The air felt heavy and dim, flickering lights barely illuminated the worn seats. Elliot noticed the passengers, all of them sat unnaturally still, heads bowed, their faces obscured by the shadows. A conductor walked down the aisle, his uniform tattered and his face hidden beneath a brimmed hat. "Ticket," he rasped, holding out a hand. Elliot fumbled for his wallet, but the conductor shook his head. "Not that kind of ticket." Confused, Elliot mumbled, "I don't understand." The conductor leaned in closer, and Elliot saw his face, a pale, hollow visage with sunken eyes and a chilling grin. "Your stop is coming soon," the conductor said before vanishing into the shadows. Moments later, the train screeched to a halt. Outside the window, Elliot saw nothing but an endless, dark forest. Suddenly, the passengers began to move, their heads snapping up in unison. Their hollow eyes locked onto him. Panicking, Elliot bolted for the door, but it wouldn't open. The passengers began rising from their seats, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if puppets on strings. Just as they reached him, Elliot woke up, sweating, heart pounding, in his bed. It was a dream. Relieved, he grabbed his phone to check the time, 12:14 a.m. A notification popped up, last train, 12:15 a.m. Don't miss it. The sound of a train whistle echoed outside his window. Jenna loved the solitude of her countryside home. Nestled between thick woods and rolling hills, it was the perfect escape from the noise of the city. She spent her evenings reading by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames making her feel safe. One evening, as she read a mystery novel, she noticed something strange. The rocking chair across the room, which hadn't moved in years, was slowly rocking back and forth. She froze, staring at it. The room was silent, no wind, no draft. Probably the house settling, she muttered, trying to dismiss her unease. The following night, the rocking chair moved again. This time, it rocked faster, creaking loudly in the silence. Jenna felt her heart race. She decided to move the chair to the basement, away from her sight. As she carried it downstairs, she felt a strange heaviness, like the chair resisted her. The basement was cold and dark, and as she left the chair in a corner, she heard a faint whisper, "Don't leave me here." Her breath hitched, but she told herself it was her imagination. She locked the basement door and went to bed, her heart pounding. That night, she dreamt of a shadowy figure sitting in the rocking chair, its hollow eyes staring at her. When she woke, the whispers hadn't stopped. They were louder now, coming from the basement. Jenna decided she'd had enough. She planned to take the chair to the dump the next day. As she dragged it outside, her neighbor, an elderly man, stopped her. "That chair," he said, his voice trembling. "Where did you get it?" "It came with the house," Jenna replied, confused. The neighbor's face turned pale. "That chair belonged to the woman who lived here before you. She used to sit in it every night, even after her son went missing. People say she never stopped rocking, waiting for him to come home. She died in that chair." Jenna's blood ran cold, but she refused to believe the tale. She drove to the dump and left the chair there, relieved to be rid of it. That night, she fell asleep easily, but she woke to the sound of creaking. Her heart sank. Slowly, she turned her head toward the corner of the room. The rocking chair was back, and in it sat the shadowy figure from her dream. It turned its hollow eyes to her and whispered, "You shouldn't have left me." Lila had just rented a quaint, old-fashioned house on the edge of town. It was cheap and charming, with creaky floors and antique furnishings. But there was one thing odd about it: the floor plan showed 5 rooms, yet her house only had 4. Her curiosity grew. She counted again: kitchen, living room, bedroom, bathroom. 4 rooms. Yet the blueprint clearly showed a 5th room, marked as storage. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard it, a faint knocking sound coming from behind the living room wall. It was rhythmic, slow, and deliberate. Determined, she grabbed a flashlight and began tapping on the walls, looking for any hollow spots. After hours of searching, she found it, a seam in the wallpaper, hidden behind an old cabinet. Her heart pounded as she pulled the paper back, revealing a small wooden door with a rusted keyhole. But there was no key. The next night, Lila heard the knocking again, louder this time. She couldn't sleep. Desperate, she pried the door open with a screwdriver. It creaked open to reveal the hidden room. It was tiny, barely large enough for a single chair, but the walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them. They were all of her, taken from impossible angles, sleeping, eating, reading. Some were dated years before she'd even moved in. In the middle of the room was a single chair facing a small hole in the wall, perfectly aligned with her living room. And on the chair was a freshly taken photo of her from moments ago, standing at the doorway. The next morning, the house was empty. The landlord came by to show it to another renter. "It's a great place," he said cheerfully, "and cheap too. Just ignore the knocking."